All right, Stephen, welcome to the archive.
Thank you.
So let's get started. Where are you from?
I'm originally from a little town in Pennsylvania called Milton.
And so what was Milton like while you were growing up?
It was interesting. Times were much different then. I grew up in the 60s and 70s in Milton, and it was a time when people they might talk about others, but it was all whispered. And being someone who never had to come out of the closet, I've just always been me. It was interesting because every town had a hairdresser, and it was like Mr. Johnson's hairdresser. So everybody knew there were gay people around, but it wasn't like today where everybody had to talk about who they are and their background and on and on. It was all just whispered about. Accepted, but,
Whispered.
Yeah.
Was that also during a time when people were fine with things, but as long as it didn't get public, it didn't roll out into their lives, if you kept to your business and I kept to mine?
Exactly. Yeah. It was very, I don't know how to put it, genteel, maybe? It wasn't in your face kind of thing.
Okay. So being kind of you stay on your side of the fence, I stay on my side of the fence.
Not really. In school, I was just me.
Okay.
And all my friends knew I was gay. It just wasn't talked about.
Okay.
Yeah, it was interesting. But you've got to remember, this was the 60s and 70s. So I grew up with all these people. It was flower power, love, accept everybody. We had films like Blackula. And so the world was more accepting at that time. Yeah. So, and we were fighting for women's rights and on, and they still don't get equal pay. The ERA hasn't been passed. So in some aspects, we've gone backwards. And I feel like I'm living all of that over again. And then the 70s came along, and disco, and we had unisex clothing. It didn't matter. Bell bottoms were bell bottoms. Love beads were love beads. It was, much more accepting.
Yeah. So just kind of taking, before we step into the 70s, well, could you give us a sense of like what everyday life was like for being in the 60s for you?
Well, I'll bring it up to my high school years.
Okay.
And it's rather funny because I was everywhere. I was art, theater, and what we had were industrial arts instead of, it was the shop classes. But coming from Pennsylvania with the Carnegies and Mellons, they really supported all of this as art. And so here I was somewhere in between the druggies and the jocks and cheerleaders. So they were all friends of mine, and so the jocks and cheerleaders assumed I was a druggie, and the druggies assumed I was a straight A student, and I was right in the middle.
That must have been interesting during that time.
I don't know. It was my life.
Yeah.
It was just the way it was.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting to hear aspects from different people about what they thought of me. So that was really fascinating. But I remember, because I was always good with wood shop and metal shop, I'd always help the football players with their projects, and the druggies too, and in art class the same thing. It was very relaxed kind of thing.
Okay. Do you think that's because you were, friends with all of these people that you got along well?
I think it was all of society, because you've got to remember we had on TV Norman Lear projects, Archie Bunker, and with All in the Family, who confronted a lot of these issues at that time, transgender issues, people of color issues, but we had films of my first crush as a film star was Sidney Poitier from Guess Who's Coming to Dinner and To Sir with Love.
He's one of my favorite actors.
Yeah, and
So good.
so that was my first childhood crush on an actor, because I spent a lot of my time in the cinema, just watching films. We had Saturday matinees, and the Christmas events were incredible because they'd have all these films, Three Stooges, sometimes newsreels, and on, recycled kind of things. And then at the end, as you were leaving, through one of the clubs in town, Lions or one of them, they'd hand out these net stockings filled with popcorn balls and candy and all of this stuff. So, those were magical things at the time.
Yeah.
For
So
a kid.
was it like a whole community thing? Like you went, you saw your movies, you saw your news, and then you got your candy out of paying for that admission ticket?
That was at holiday time. There was no admission ticket. You got in free.
Okay.
It was around Christmas
Wow.
that you got these. But Saturday mornings, they often had Three Stooges and Abbott and Costello and Boston Blackie, all of these older films. And because of growing up where I did, we had access to incredible public TV. So I grew up watching all the old 40s films. My mother loved them. And that's where I was introduced to Frankenstein and Dracula and the Mummy and Bette Davis. And, as a child, you dream of someday being there, being on screen.
And how many times have you played Dracula now, or through your acting career?
In my film work, I've only played a vampire once so
Only
far.
once?
Yes.
I thought you had to play a vampire multiple times.
No. Well, there was a music video where I was called a darling. It was a music video called Ugly by Madelon, the rock group. And so I did have fangs for that. But it wasn't quite sure what that character was, but it was one of the most fun characters I've ever played.
Nice.
They just let me run with it.
Nice.
So, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so childhood was pretty good for you
Yes.
in Middleton, Pennsylvania. So did you always dream of doing art and film and...
Well, I always did art.
Yeah.
So as an artist, when I was in high school, I was in 2 galleries in Pennsylvania, which I was thrilled with. One gallery was actually owned by people who worked for the Smithsonian Institute. So, I was so honored.
Nice.
But I still keep up the fine art. And the film I never started until I was, I think, 54.
54.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was sitting home one day and I was bored, so I was on Craigslist just looking for things for sale and on, and all of a sudden I saw a casting call. And I thought, yeah, it's Craigslist, got to be careful. Fortunately, I recognized the name of the director and I thought, I've got nothing to do tomorrow. might as well. And I auditioned and got cast, and that started the ball rolling. But that came, the headshots for that came about from, I think it was the early 90s when I had headshots done by a photographer in Lowell at the time, Kevin Harkins. And I never did anything with them until that role. So it was a good thing I had those. Yeah. So that was the start of that.
Wow. That's cool. Just one day, decided, all right, I'm bored. I'm going to get into this. We're doing this.
Well, I had to get over a lot because we all put roadblocks in front of ourselves, and that's what I was doing. I knew I always wanted to be in film, but I kept telling myself, you're never going to move to Hollywood, you're not going to move to New York, you're certainly no Brad Pitt. So I kept doing this to myself, and it was that day, for some reason, I thought, got nothing to lose. What's the worst they can say? No. I've heard no since I've been 2 years old. So get over it. So yeah, the film career had gone really well, actually.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I know we've worked together. Been able to work one time. I got you one time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that file ended up going corrupt and I lost.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And a lot of my films I don't get to see. They go to like festivals and then they disappear.
Yeah.
And I can't travel to all of the festivals, so I never see a lot of them.
So there's a lot you don't know as to
Yeah.
how it turned out.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Normally, like if I ever have to act, by the time it's over with, I'm like so sick of hearing my own voice. I don't want to see the movie.
Oh, and see, I get so wrapped up into my character that I don't pay attention to anything else. It's very bizarre, actually. As a matter of fact, one film I did, I actually had to pull a prop gun out and shoot somebody. Did it, was fine, no problem. The next day, I had incredible anxiety because I pulled a gun on somebody and shot them. Mm-hmm. It really messed with my head because I get so into character that it was like, where was I? What, you know? And
was that part of why you retired, because of the how it psychologically affected?
Part of it, and it is very draining. People think it's an easy thing, but acting like that and delving into everything that's in you for these different characters can be really exhausting. Film work is also interesting because you'll be shooting a scene, Brute Sanity, which is a film that I star in. We're sitting in chairs like this, and nothing around us at all, green screen. Well, when I finally saw the film, I'm in a surveillance van with all this equipment in front of me. So it's interesting when you have to put yourself into that pretend play, and then when you see what they do with it, it's like, wow.
How'd you pull that off?
Again, it's just whatever character I am, I just made sure they put something so I had a line of sight, and that was it. I'm Agent Maskin, who was crazy and evil. It's in here somewhere.
It's in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, but did you have fun at least doing all of those roles?
I did. I loved the work. As long as it was working. Hated the downtime. But I loved the work. Auditioning is awful. There's a Oscar-winning writer in New Hampshire that I went to audition for up in Vermont. Worst audition ever. 3 hours of sitting and waiting, and students of his classes would be taken before me, even though I was there, and I thought, there's no way I'm working for this guy ever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a bit rough after a while. Do you find being an artist, there's it gets less into your head now that you're painting and doing art and putting...
No, actually. The art, I define myself as a homo surrealist. It's a homogenization of all the surrealistic images that these little Polaroid snapshots of everything we've ever experienced, every memory we've ever had, every color we've seen, and that's what I bring to my paintings. They're all over the place. I'll do portraits, and I'm prone to night terrors, where I wake up screaming. In the summer, when the windows are open, the neighbors don't like it. But sometimes I will actually paint those. Other times it's I'll have a scent that I need to express. All these little, because all of our memories, it's usually just little Polaroids of memories. They're not even little movies.
It's like Snapchat all the time.
And so I try to capture those on the canvas.
Interesting.
Yeah, and what I'm feeling about that image.
Well, it makes the paintings I see you post on Facebook more interesting to look at now.
It's hard to explain them to people other than that, because it's not, all I'm looking for is somebody to take away an emotion from looking at the work. I don't care whether it's kind of love thing or a hate thing, or if the artwork disturbs you, that's all good, because that's what I go through on these little Polaroids all the time, is they're invading my mind. So, and it's very bizarre. I don't know whether I should go there, but there are times when I'm painting. It can be something like a field and sky, and I get aroused. Doing art is so personal to me. It's very bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's how you get the best art, though, is you have to get personal with it.
Yeah. Artists are weird.
Yeah. We're weird. We're a bunch of weirdos.
And that's a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a weirdo to listen to people's stories.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting. So were the night terrors there before the art, or did the night terrors come along, and did your art change? Did you do something before?
No, I've always had nightmares and night terrors. But even as a little child, I was drawing and painting and...
Yeah. So they just go hand in hand.
Yeah. But I've gotten into everything. I mean, I do woodworking, restoration, plaster, walls, and just everything.
Yeah, but that's good though.
I want to find out how to do this, and so I do it.
Yeah. So as you're painting throughout the years, have you been able to kind of cross paths a little bit with what you do in activism or other things in your life?
Well, I think it freed me up because of dealing with the different emotions. So I think it freed me up to work with the groups I do for the LGBT activism. So I've worked with the No Hate campaign and raise funds for Cyndi Lauper's True Colors Fund. And I'm still, this is, I think, my 5th or 6th year of working with the Human Library. The Human Library is fascinating. So what you will have is a bunch of people who are books. And my title was originally 15 Minutes with Kurt's Husband. So people would come in and they would check you out, you're the book, and they would sit down and they'd have 15 minutes to talk with you, ask you any question that they want, and you can reply. But in this group of books, you might have a Muslim, you might have a sexual assault survivor. It's just this gamut, a blind person, and so it's extraordinary to bring these people into a safe space for others to ask them questions about what's it like to be transgender, or, on and on.
All right. Wow, that's fascinating.
That's exhausting.
Yeah, I can picture that.
That's very exhausting to go through these. But of course, the pandemic came along, and so a lot of these were done with Zoom. So I've been able to work with Heineken and on, different companies across the world.
Yeah. It's an interesting visual. A whole line of different people all being checked out as books, and you get 15 minutes to talk. Wow.
It's a brilliant concept.
It is a brilliant concept. Absolutely brilliant concept.
Yeah. And I started that here in New Hampshire.
How did that get started?
A librarian from Southern New Hampshire University had seen a posting that I put on Facebook because I had some issues at work where supervisors used the word gay.
Yeah.
Didn't sit well with me. But so I was having a bad day, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to my local bar and have dinner and a cocktail, and I just need time. Well, I'm sitting there, and at the corner, this end, there are two men talking, and I hear one say to the other about his wedding ring. He said, "That's gay." Bad timing. Mm-hmm. Slammed my fist down on the bar, and I said, "You fucking say that again, I'm going to knock you off your stool." And I'm not a violent person by any means. It was just, I was having a bad day. And it was the second time that day.
The camel's back.
And yes, the bartender walked to the other end. The couple that were sitting across the bar from me leaned into their food. And it turned out that then he apologized, and I gave me his life story and his children and on, but he never knew anything more about me. So I had posted all of this on Facebook, and a librarian at Southern New Hampshire University saw it, and they were having a human library event, and said, "Would you like to be a book?" I said, "Absolutely."
Do you find today more people are interested in sitting down and listening to each other's stories, wanting to hear your side of things?
I think that the Human Library proved it to me, that if there's a safe space where people can ask questions, and because we're curious as humans, we see these things about different types of people and different backgrounds. But it's hard for us to put ourselves in their shoes. So it's an extraordinary thing because people have asked some brilliant questions of me. And I thought, that's interesting. And I answer them as honestly as I can so that they can walk away with more information or more curiosity.
Interesting. Did you find, like, in the 60s or the 70s or even the 80s, because for me, I've always heard that the 70s and the 80s, those are kind of the times where it started becoming okay to come out. That's the narrative I've always heard. Even at that, when you were younger, did you ever hear people's curiosity? Did people want to listen to, like...
Well, the curiosity factor at that time, in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, we had transgender people like Dr. Renee Richards, and, I can't think of the other woman. I'll think of her later, I'm sure. But you also had books coming out that everybody was reading and whispering about, like Myra Breckenridge, that was about transgender. So the late 60s, early 70s were an interesting time. You had athletes writing books in the 70s. Dave Kopay, who was a former pro football star, who wrote a book about being out. So the 80s, I think, were a little more of a hindrance. The 70s, it was
already being talked about.
Well, and you had films out like Bob and Carol, Ted and Alice about swapping. So things were really more open at that time. Things got buttoned up more in the 80s. And of course, AIDS came along, and that was a horrifying time because the papers unfortunately called it the gay cancer, and it did at that point affect, at least in this country, gay men, whereas in Africa it was everybody. But we in America don't hear much about world news at all. Hell, we don't know what's happening in Canada. And I remember at the time there were politicians suggesting that they take all gay people and put them on an island, and on and on. I mean, it was horrifying.
And what was your response when you heard that? I mean,
I was horrified. I was scared because you didn't know where this would lead. I mean, this was Nazi Germany rhetoric. So we all knew, and so there was that constant undercurrent of what is going to happen to us. Will we survive AIDS? Will we survive the government? You know? Yeah. That's tough.
Yeah. I mean, did you see people start getting quieter? Were they getting, reactive? Were they getting violent? Were they more protesty?
The potential was there because of the rhetoric and the stories that were on television in the media. And we knew what people were capable of. And I'm seeing it happen again. Right now, the number of, unfortunately, mostly transgender women of color being murdered, the figures are staggering. It's like, leave them alone. What do you care?
This is what percent of the population?
I don't know, but it's a small percentage of the population, but they're singling them out and murdering them. Yeah, lot of things that are reminiscent of decades ago.
Yeah. Is it worse? Is it different?
It's different in a lot of ways. It's different because people speak about it more, and you have access to more information because of the internet. Thank God for the internet, because there are those LGBT and questioning people in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest. The nearest neighbor is, 30 miles away. And they now have access to information, both good and bad.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. So technology has helped and hurt,
Yeah.
like all new things.
Yeah. It's always leverage for people with good intentions and bad intentions.
Yes, exactly.
And do you think that there could even be an aversion to some of the, like people are averting some of their problems because of technology? Like they don't want to deal with any psychological issues that they have, like an anxiety as an example for coming out.
Right.
And it's just something they just don't want to deal with right now. And tech is helping it? Or do you think it's helping more with, no, I should probably address this issue?
I don't know. That's a hard one to answer because I belong to all these different groups on Facebook, and I'm reading all these stories about men. Of course, it's a lot of the gay men's groups that I belong to, and I'm reading about them coming out, and they're in their 50s, and they were married with children, but they're finally discovering who they are. There's a friend of mine who's transgender, a politician here in New Hampshire, and same, she didn't come out until later in life. Another friend in Massachusetts who is a director, and she transgendered later in life also. And that has to be very empowering to finally take that mask off and be who you've been all this time.
Yeah.
I admire it.
Nice. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
One of my favorite guitar players, April Wadden's transgender, and you'll never hear about her because she was so closed off to the world.
Oh.
And it's just somebody who got up on a stage and played guitar for hours every night.
Yeah.
And it was just that. He never did an interview.
Yeah. The other woman from the 60s, Christine Jorgensen.
Mm-hmm.
Many times she was interviewed on the news, in the news, and there was a film about her, and yeah. So, growing up with this stuff, it was.
So you say thank God for the internet, but back 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like how would you find out? Like how would you find a community compared to now?
Well, there were, like in the 80s, there were gay bars in New Hampshire. However, in order for them to have a liquor license, they had to be a private club because of the laws were so restrictive in New Hampshire. They couldn't just be a gay bar. So they opened with a club license. And so when you went, you had to join. It was inexpensive, but still. That was part of the hindering of the population.
So it was more of a secret society.
It wasn't so secret. I mean, they were downtown bars, but yeah, you had to have a membership in order to get in. So there was a lot of restriction going on in the 80s and 90s.
Were there ever like different forms of meetups other than like these bars or private clubs?
Oh, yes. There were places, cruising spots. So it might be, I guess here you call them park and rides type of thing, places like that, and roadside picnic areas. And
So you'd find like a ad somewhere that would say, "Hey, gay picnic."
no, people would stop there. I went with some friends, and it was funny. He taught me all of this stuff. I didn't drive, by the way, until I was 40. So, but he explained the whole process, like where trucks would pull off and cars would join them. A friend of ours, she would pick up truckers quite often, and there was something to do with the brake lights. You tap the brake lights and wait for somebody else to tap their brake lights, and I never got the whole concept of it down, but it worked out for them. They got dates, so I was too shy. But it was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's colorful. It's like this whole separate adventure you have to go through just to get a date.
And things that people don't know about, because that was part of the rural hidden culture, although I understand that it still goes on at some of the rest areas off the highways here. Yeah. Because every now and then you'll see something in a police log about somebody being arrested.
Arrested.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess some things never die.
It's the thrill of it all.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so the 2000s came along. So can you give me a sense of, so like you had private clubs, you had your special encrypted message locations where you meet other gay people, but like outside of all of this, like what was regular life like? You just kind of went to these special places and then just went back to doing your own thing and never talked to anyone about it?
There was nothing to talk about. It was just me. Although when I went to college at Lawlor, there was a gay group. And so you met people there, and word gets out amongst the community, and a lot of politicians in Lowell at the time would have fundraisers and so on and so forth. And I believe Rainbow Coalition out of Mass was a big political movement at that time, and I'm trying to remember when that was. But they would openly invite everybody to these functions for votes. And I remember being at one of these, and I got the invite through a college roommate. And so we're there at this function, and they're finally having dancing, and I said, "Harry, you want to dance?" And he was like, "No." I said, "This is the platform that they're running on of acceptance. So what are you trying to tell me?" And he went, "Oh, okay." So we danced, and all of a sudden all the politicians came over then and started talking to us.
Yeah.
Before then, they were kind of separate, but if they thought they could get the vote, still goes on.
Still goes on. So I think we're going to close, but do you have anything you'd like to share to future generations, looking back on all of it?
Yes, believe in yourself. You know deep down what you want to do, who you are, and people are always going to tell you no. But you've got to trust yourself. Whether it's your career, your personal life, follow who you are. And you can do anything. You really can. If you want to be an artist, an actor, a musician, do it. Stop making excuses. It doesn't mean that you're going to be the next Beethoven or Picasso, but it doesn't mean that you cannot do it. You can.
All right. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.